The city glittered beneath Ryan Harrison like a kingdom he had conquered. But the view no longer moved him. From the 58th floor of Manhattan's tallest glass tower, the lights spread endlessly, each window and street lamp flickering like a star on earth. People would give anything for this view, for this seat at the top of the world. But Ryan felt nothing. He adjusted the perfect fold of his Armani tie, more out of habit than pride, and swirled the golden liquid in his glass. The scotch was 30 years old, imported and aged longer than some of his employees had been alive. Yet it tasted like water on his tongue. Across the restaurant, couples leaned close over candlelight, laughter spilling between them. Ryan sat alone at a table meant for two. The emptiness was no accident, it was the cost of victory. He had built Harrison Global Ventures from the ground up, transforming an ambitious idea into a financial empire that sprawled across 3 continents. The company's reach extended into shipping, technology, finance, and real estate, an endless network of numbers and contracts that all flowed back to him. His net worth was counted in billions. His name carried weight in boardrooms from New York to Singapore. Men twice his age bowed their heads to his decisions. He had been crowned a visionary, a titan of industry, a living example of what relentless drive could achieve. But the truth he carried alone was simpler and colder. Ryan had sacrificed everything human to become this machine. The waiter approached, bowing slightly as though in the presence of royalty. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Harrison?" he asked, eyes lowered with respect. Ryan didn't look up. "Just the check," he said flatly. The man vanished like a shadow, leaving Ryan to his silence. His phone buzzed with a message from Victor, his uncle and the company's chairman. "Singapore deal locked. 9 figures. Celebrate, nephew." Ryan read it without reaction. 9 figures. Another victory for the empire. Once, such a message would have filled him with electricity, proof that he was shaping the world. Now it felt no different than glancing at the weather. Another storm, another clear sky. Numbers that meant nothing outside the glass walls of his office. His gaze drifted back to the skyline, and against his will, the ghost of a memory came with it. Amanda, her laugh, sharp and bright, had once cut through his seriousness like a flame. He remembered her eyes when she told him she was pregnant, the tremor in her voice when she whispered she wanted a family, not an empire. He had dismissed her, dismissed the child she carried, as though they were inconveniences rather than lives. He had convinced himself that love was weakness, that responsibility would anchor him before his empire could rise. She had left him that day. Her last words etched in his mind like a scar. "You want an empire. I want a life." 6 years had passed, yet her voice haunted him in quiet moments like this. When the applause of the world faded and the silence pressed in, he shifted in his chair, forcing the thought down, as he always did. He had made the right choice, hadn't he? He told himself so every morning when he rose in his penthouse, every evening when he signed billion-dollar contracts. Still, the emptiness spread like a crack across glass, invisible to most eyes but growing deeper with time. His empire stood, unshaken, but inside, Ryan Harrison carried a fault line that no fortune could mend. Somewhere, buried beneath the weight of his empire, was a man he had chosen not to be. The glass walls of the restaurant seemed to tighten around Ryan, trapping him in his own silence. He pushed back his chair. It scraped against polished marble, a sound as sharp in the hushed luxury of the place. The waiter returned with the check, but Ryan hardly noticed. He tossed a $100 bill onto the linen tablecloth, a careless gesture that would cover far more than the meal he had barely touched. His chest felt heavy, as though something unseen pressed down on him, a force stronger than the weight of all his billions. He walked to the towering window once more, as though drawn there by an instinct he didn't understand. Outside, Manhattan was alive. The night pulsed with headlights, hurried footsteps, and the hum of voices rising into the cold autumn air. Ryan had always seen the city from this height above it, apart from it, as though it were a kingdom he ruled. But now, for the first time in years, his eyes were drawn not to the skyline, but to the street. A cluster of people had gathered near the edge of an alleyway, a ripple of murmurs passing through them. Curiosity narrowed his gaze. In the center of the small crowd was a woman, her thin coat drawn tight against the biting wind. She held a cardboard sign close to her chest, the words scrawled in uneven lines, though from this distance Ryan couldn't read them. What he could see was her face pale under the glow of a flickering street lamp, her hair pulled back in a way that was painfully familiar. His stomach clenched. For a moment, He thought his mind was playing tricks on him, but then she turned slightly, and there was no mistaking her, Amanda. The name struck him like a physical blow, unlocking doors he had welded shut. Her features were worn, sharpened by years of hardship, but her eyes, those were the same. The same eyes that had looked at him with both love and fury 6 years ago. The same eyes that had begged him to choose life with her, and the same ones that had hardened when he told her no, before he could process the sight. Movement tugged at the edge of the scene. 3 small figures emerged from the shadows of the alley, running to her. Children, boys. Ryan leaned closer to the window, breath fogging the glass. They were young, 5 years old at most, their coats frayed and shoes scuffed. Amanda bent down, gathering them in her arms, and even from this distance Ryan saw it, the unmistakable reflection of himself, blonde hair that gleamed even under the weak street light, green eyes that cut through the night. 3 identical faces, his chest seized as if gripped by an iron hand. His son's. The tumbler slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that turned every head in the restaurant. Waiters hurried forward, voices flustered, but Ryan barely heard them. His world had narrowed to the street below, to Amanda and the 3 children clinging to her side. He staggered back, then forward again, unable to look away. For years he had convinced himself he had chosen correctly, empire over family, ambition over love. Yet here, in one unbearable instant, he was confronted with the cost of that choice. 3 boys who should have been asleep in warm beds, laughing in a home that belonged to him. Instead, they stood in the cold with a cardboard sign. Children of a man blind to see beyond his empire. He didn't remember leaving the restaurant. One moment, he was standing in the wreckage of crystal and whispers, and the next he was rushing into the lobby, heart pounding in his ears. The elevator felt like a prison, its descent unbearably slow. His reflection in the polished steel doors stared back at him. Ryan Harrison, billionaire, visionary, man of power, yet all he saw was a stranger who had turned his back on life itself. The October air hit him like a slap as he burst onto the street. His breath came ragged, his eyes scanning the crowd, desperate, terrified that they would vanish before he reached them. Then he saw her, Amanda, kneeling, adjusting the collar of one boy's coat, her hand trembling in the wind. He froze. The city noise fell away, replaced by the thunder of his heartbeat. "Amanda," he said, his voice breaking. She stiffened, her body rigid, then turned slowly. Their eyes met, and for a single moment, time itself seemed to stop. Her expression shifted through shock, fear, anger, and something else, something that hurt him more than all the rest. She pulled the boys closer, shielding them as though from an enemy. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of 6 years, and then the triplets looked up at him. 3 pairs of green eyes so identical to his own that it felt like staring into mirrors of a past he had abandoned. His throat tightened, words burning in his chest. "They're mine," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the truth written in their faces, undeniable and unforgiving. The street around them seemed to blur into nothingness, as though the whole city held its breath. Car horns blared in the distance. A taxi swerved close to the curb. Voices rose and fell around them, but Ryan and Amanda stood frozen, 2 lives colliding again after 6 long years. Her grip on the boys tightened. They clung to her coat, small hands twisting the fabric as though she might vanish if they let go. Ryan's chest constricted at the sight, guilt and longing crashing over him in equal measure. Amanda's face had changed. Time had carved shadows under her eyes. Her skin pale from too many nights braving the cold. Yet her spirit, the quiet fire that once drew him in, was still there, flickering in the way she held her sons close, unbroken even in struggle. Ryan took a hesitant step forward, but Amanda's sharp glance stopped him. Her eyes, though tired, held a warning that pierced deeper than words. "We should go," she whispered to the boys, her voice steady but strained. "No, wait," Ryan's voice cracked, unrecognizable even to himself. He reached out instinctively, but stopped halfway, his hand suspended in the cold air between them. The tallest of the boys stepped in front of his mother, his chin lifted, small shoulders square with a courage that stabbed Ryan's heart. "Are you okay, Mom?" the boy asked, his voice small but fierce. Amanda smoothed his hair. "Yes, Dylan, I'm fine." Ryan's breath caught. Dylan, the name spun in his mind, heavy with meaning. He took another step, His eyes locked on the children. "How old are they?" he asked, though deep down he already knew. Amanda's lips pressed tight, her answer barely audible. 5. The number slammed into him like a hammer. 5 years. The exact measure of his absence. He had thrown Amanda out when she was carrying them. He had walked away from fatherhood before it had even begun. His vision blurred as Shane clawed at him, but Dylan's steady stare cut through his unraveling. The boy looked just like him at that age, defiant, protective, unwilling to back down. Before Ryan could find the words, a tug at Amanda's sleeve broke the silence. The smallest of the three tilted his head up, his voice tremulous. "Mom, I'm hungry." The simple plea gutted him more than any accusation. While he had feasted on aged Scotch and Wagyu beef, his sons, his own flesh and blood, were begging for food on the streets. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of it. "Come with me," he blurted, desperate, reckless. "All of you, please." Amanda's jaw tightened, pride warred with practicality in her eyes. Ryan could see the storm behind them, the humiliation of being offered help by the man who had abandoned her, the aching need to keep her boys safe. Her silence cut deeper than anger. "Just dinner," he said quickly, softening his tone. "Nothing more tonight. Dinner, and then we'll talk." The boys looked up at their mother expectantly, their innocence heavy in the air. At last, Amanda gave a reluctant nod. "Okay," she murmured, her voice brittle. "Just dinner." Ryan flagged down a taxi, fumbling like a man unaccustomed to such ordinary gestures. He almost directed the driver to one of his usual fine dining spots, Michelin stars, glass walls, silent staff, but Amanda's glance stopped him cold. She would not let their boys be paraded through polished marble like charity cases. He swallowed hard and redirected them to a small family diner a few blocks away, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the night. Inside, the worn booth smelled faintly of coffee and fried food. The triplets slid into the cracked vinyl seats, their wide eyes darting over the laminated menus. Amanda sat with them, her posture straight, protective, while Ryan took the opposite bench. The silence was unbearable. The waitress came, smiled kindly at the boys, and took their order, 3 plates of spaghetti, which they devoured with the unrestrained hunger of children who had gone along without enough. Ryan could barely breathe. Every twirl of their forks was a knife in his chest. He tried to speak. "They're good eaters." His voice sounded clumsy, foreign. Amanda's lips twitched into a faint smile, though it never reached her eyes. "They're growing boys. The middle child." Mason, he learned the name from Amanda's gentle correction, fidgeted with Ryan's expensive watch, his curious gaze locked on the intricate gears. Ryan froze, struck by the innocence of it. Meanwhile, Dylan kept his wary eyes on him, never relaxing his guard, and Ethan, the quietest of the three, simply stared at Ryan as though trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. "Why do you look like us?" Ethan asked suddenly, his small voice breaking the tension like glass. Amanda's breath hitched. "Ethan," she said gently, warning him about personal questions. But Ryan leaned forward, his throat tight. He wanted to shout the truth, to cry, that they were his sons, that he had been blind, that he would never walk away again. Instead, the words that left his mouth were a bitter lie. Sometimes people look alike by coincidence. The taste of those words nearly choked him. But Amanda's grateful glance told him it was what she wanted, at least for now, to shield them until she was ready. The boys cheered when Amanda promised ice cream for dessert, while they dashed toward the glowing fish tank near the entrance, their laughter carrying across the room. Amanda leaned in close, her voice low and sharp. 5 minutes, she said. Ask what you need to ask. Then we leave. Ryan's hands trembled against the table. The chance he had been denied for 6 years now lay before him, fragile, dangerous, fleeting, and the truth Amanda carried was about to strike him harder than anything his empire had ever prepared him for. The boys pressed their little hands against the glass of the diner's fish tank, their laughter echoing faintly through the room as neon lights from outside flickered across their faces. They were utterly mesmerized by the clownfish darting through coral and the puffed-up curiosity of a ballooning pufferfish. For them, the world was still magical, a place where bright colors and tiny creatures could bring joy. For Ryan, however, the world was crumbling. He sat across from Amanda, his body tense, his chest rising and falling as though he'd run a marathon. The sound of forks scraping on porcelain and the hum of the diner's ceiling fan were all muted. Beneath the pounding of his heart, Amanda sat opposite him, her back straight, Her face set in lines of quiet strength. She was no longer the soft-voiced woman he remembered from years ago. Hardship had reshaped her into someone different, sharper, stronger, but with wounds hidden beneath the surface. She clasped her hands together on the table, her knuckles white. The dim light above her cast shadows across her face, making her eyes gleam like polished steel. "Ask what you need to ask," she said, her tone low and steady. 5 minutes, that's all you get." Ryan swallowed hard. He had rehearsed speeches in his head over the years, imagined what he'd say if Amanda ever came back. But now, sitting here with the truth of his choices staring him in the face, all those practice lines collapsed into nothing. "When did you find out?" he asked, his voice raw. "That you were pregnant." Amanda's eyes flickered. For a moment, she seemed to falter. But then, her chin lifted. 3 weeks after. "You told me to leave." Ryan's chest caved inward. He pressed his hands to the table, fighting to steady himself. "And you didn't think I deserved to know." Her face tightened, anger breaking through the careful restraint. "I called, Ryan. 3 times. I begged your assistant to put me through. Do you know what she said? That you were too busy for personal distractions. Too busy for me. Too busy for your unborn children." The words hit him like daggers. His mind shot back to Diane, his old assistant. He remembered how ruthlessly she guarded his schedule, how she had worn no like armor against the world. In those days, he had praised her efficiency, never questioning who she had turned away. Now, the truth cut him to the core. "I never got those messages," he said, the words trembling from his lips. Amanda leaned forward, her eyes burning into his. "Would it have mattered if you had? The day I told you I was pregnant, you looked me in the eye and called it an inconvenient complication to your 5-year plan. Do you really think hearing it again would have changed your mind?" Ryan winced as though she'd struck him across the face. He remembered that moment vividly. He had been obsessed with the company's expansion, every move calculated like pieces on a chessboard. He had believed he was invincible, that nothing could distract him. Now he saw the wreckage of that arrogance sitting right in front of him. "I was wrong," he whispered. "God, Amanda, I was wrong. I thought I was building something that mattered. But I see now." His voice cracked. He glanced toward the boys, their laughter still carrying faintly from across the room. "They mattered. You mattered." Amanda shook her head. Her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Don't say that now. It's easy to regret when you're sitting in a warm booth while they're wearing jackets with holes in them. Where were you when I was holding Dylan through fevers in the dead of winter? Where were you when Mason cried himself to sleep because he was hungry? Where were you when Ethan asked why all the other kids had a dad and I had to lie?" The words shredded him. Ryan gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. He had faced ruthless boardrooms, hostile takeovers, cutthroat negotiations, but nothing had ever stripped him down like this. He wanted to shout, to beg forgiveness, but shame silenced him. "Tell me about them," he managed finally, his voice a broken plea. Amanda's expression softened just slightly. She looked toward the boys, her eyes tender despite the anger in her heart. "Dylan is the oldest by 3 minutes. He's my protector. He watches out for his brothers like his life depends on it." Mason, a small smile tugged at her lips. "He lives in his imagination. He draws on anything he can find. He tells stories the way other children breathe." "And Ethan," she paused, her throat tightening. "Ethan notices everything. Nothing escapes him. He's always asking why. Sometimes I don't have the answers." Ryan's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears still brimmed. These were his sons, his blood, his legacy, not the skyscrapers or the millions in his accounts. Them. And he had missed it all. "What do you want, Ryan?" Amanda's voice cut into the storm of his guilt. She leaned closer, her tone sharp. "Why did you chase us down? Why now? Out of guilt? Or because you can't stand to see them hungry when you're drowning in billions?" The question sliced him open. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He didn't know. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was love, buried under years of ambition. Maybe it was simply the sight of 3 green-eyed boys who looked at him like strangers. Before he could answer, laughter burst from the entrance as the boys came rushing back. "Mom, there's a fist that puffs up like a balloon," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. Dylan tugged at Amanda's sleeve. Mason clutched a napkin covered in a crude sketch of a fish. Amanda gathered her purse and stood. "It's past their bedtime," she said firmly. "We should go." "No, tomorrow," Ryan blurted, panic rising in his chest. "Please, Amanda. Meet me tomorrow. Central Park, by the carousel, 2 o'clock. Amanda hesitated, her hand frozen on Dylan's shoulder, her eyes locked on his for a long, unbearable moment. Then, with a slow, guarded nod, she whispered, "We'll see." As they walked toward the door, Ethan paused, his small hand lifted in a quiet wave, his green eyes shining with something to wise for his age. "Bye," he said softly. "Goodbye." Ryan sat frozen in the booth, watching them disappear into the night. His empire had never felt so meaningless, his power so fragile. For the first time in his life, Ryan Harrison wasn't thinking about the billions he might lose, but about the 3 little boys he had already lost and might never win back. The night after their fragile reunion stretched endlessly for Ryan. He returned to his penthouse, but the glass walls, marble floors, and panoramic views no longer comforted him. They mocked him and stayed cold reminders that while he slept in silk sheets, his children lay in a cramped room somewhere, wrapped in threadbare blankets against the autumn chill. For the first time in his life, Ryan didn't touch the stack of contracts waiting on his mahogany desk. He didn't check the stock tickers that usually defined his mood. He sat in the dark, replaying Amanda's words, her accusations, the way Dylan stood in front of her like a miniature soldier. Every echo of her voice hollowed him further. By morning, he was restless, pacing the length of his office like a man awaiting judgment. When the clock neared 2, he abandoned his meetings and rode in silence to Central Park. The carousel turned slowly in the distance, its painted horses bobbing up and down, children's laughter weaving through the crisp air. He spotted them before they spotted him. Amanda, standing tall despite the wear of her coat, and the 3 boys circling near her, their faces bright with the simple thrill of the park. For a moment, Ryan felt paralyzed. What right did he have to step into this picture? He was an intruder in the very life he should have built. When Amanda's eyes met his, they held none of the softness of the past. She motioned for the boys to stay close, and Ryan approached, each step heavy as lead. Dylan folded his arms, watching him with suspicion. Mason clutched a small notebook and pencil, sketching even as he walked. Ethan's quiet stare never wavered, piercing Ryan as if to say, "Prove yourself." They circled the carousel together, though Amanda kept her distance. Ryan tried small talk, asking about school, about their favorite games, but the boys answered in fragments, eyes flickering back to their mother for guidance. Amanda said little. She was measuring him, weighing every word, every gesture. The silence pressed harder than any boardroom confrontation he had ever endured. Finally, Mason broke it. "Why do you want to see us?" he asked suddenly, his childlike voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Ryan swallowed, his throat dry. "Because I should have been here," he said. "Because I missed too much already." His voice cracked, the rawness of it startling even himself. Amanda's jaw tightened. "Words are cheap, Ryan. They won't feed them. They won't undo 6 years." He nodded, absorbing the blow. "Then let me show you. Let me try." Over the next weeks, Ryan forced himself into an unfamiliar role, not the billionaire CEO, but a man inclined to earn trust. He showed up at the park with sandwiches, sat on the grass sketching with Mason, listened as Ethan asked questions about everything from the stars to why leaves changed color. Dylan, always the protector, challenged him most, demanding why he hadn't been there before. Each question tore Ryan open, but he didn't run. He answered honestly even when the answers painted him as selfish, blind, and wrong. Slowly, suspicion turned to curiosity. Dylan allowed him to toss a football back and forth, though his eyes still narrowed with doubt. Mason began to chatter about the worlds he imagined, worlds Ryan had never paused to enter. Ethan slipped his small hand into Ryan's one evening, silent but steady, a gesture that nearly unraveled him on the spot. But just as Ryan began to believe he could repair the damage, the storm broke. A photographer lurking in the park captured him kneeling beside Amanda and the boys, tying Mason's shoelace. By the next morning, tabloids screamed with headlines, "Billionaire's secret family." Photos splashed across magazines and screens. Ryan Harrison, the untouchable titan, suddenly painted as a man with hidden children, a scandal that threatened to undo years of cultivated image. The calls began pouring in. His board demanded answers. Investors panicked. Victor, his uncle, thundered into his office. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Billions are on the line. Ryan? Billions? You need to shut this down tonight. Bury it. Whatever it takes. Ryan stood at the window, watching the city sprawl below. For once, the skyscrapers didn't make him feel powerful. They felt like prison bars. He thought of Amanda's eyes, of Ethan's hand in his. Slowly, he turned to Victor, his voice firm, but steady. I won't deny them. Not anymore. You'll destroy everything you built. Victor barked. Ryan shook his head. No, I destroyed everything that mattered 6 years ago. This, he gestured toward the headlines littering his desk. This I can survive. Losing them again. I can't. The words left Victor stunned, but Ryan felt something inside him shift. For the first time, he was ready to choose differently. Not empire, not numbers, but life still. Amanda's walls were high. The scandal had dragged her and the boys into an unforgiving spotlight. Paparazzi camped outside the small apartment she had fought to keep. Strangers whispered. Doors that were already closed to her now slammed tighter. And though Ryan swore he would protect them, Amanda stared at him with eyes like ice. You started this storm, she said bitterly one night as they met in the park again. Now tell me, how will you shield them from it? Ryan didn't have the answer yet, but he knew he would find one. For once in his life, failure was not an option. The headlines would not die. Every paper, every television screen, every digital banner screamed his name alongside Amanda's face, and the wide green eyes of 3 little boys, who had never asked to be born into scandal. Billionaire's secret. Family. Harrison Air scandal rocks Wall Street. Ryan had endured hostile takeovers and smear campaigns before, but this was different. This wasn't business. This was blood, flesh, truth clawing its way into the open. And for once, he did not want to bury it. He wanted the world to know. But the world's gaze was merciless. Cameras crowded outside Amanda's crumbling apartment building. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, shouting questions, snapping photos, shoving microphones toward the frightened faces of children. Dylan tried to hold his brothers close, but his young shoulders shook. Mason cried when a flashbulb exploded too close. Ethan, quiet as always, whispered to his mother, "Why are they chasing us?" Amanda wrapped her arms around them, fury in her eyes, but she was trapped. Ryan watched from the black window of his town car, every instinct screaming at him to charge into the mob. But Amanda had forbidden him to come that night. "You brought this on us," she had said, her voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "Now fix it." At Harrison Global's headquarters, the storm was worse. Investors lined the boardroom table, their expressions sharp, their voices sharper. "Your personal recklessness is bleeding into our stock value," one snarled. "Do you understand what this means? Billions and deals are unraveling. Singapore may walk. London is nervous. We cannot afford sentiment." Ryan, Victor, his uncle, slammed a fist on the table. "End it. Cut them off. Pay them quietly if you must, but distance yourself before the company bleeds out." Ryan stood at the head of the table, every eye trained on him. The skyline glittered beyond the glass, the same city he had once ruled with iron logic. Now, standing before men who had crowned him a titan, Ryan felt strangely calm. He remembered Amanda's words in the diner, the sound of Ethan asking why he looked like them, the simple plea of a child saying, "I'm hungry." He took a breath. For years, I built this company by sacrificing everything that mattered. I told myself family was weakness. I told myself love was a distraction. And what did I get? Empty nights. Hollow victories. I abandoned the only people who should have been my legacy. That ends now. Gasps rippled around the table. "Ryan," Victor hissed. "Do you realize what you're saying?" Ryan straightened his shoulders. "I'm saying I will not deny them. I will not bury them. If the cost of keeping my children is this empire, then so be it. Fire me, strip me of titles, take it all, but you will not take them." The room erupted in outrage. Papers slammed against the table. Investors stormed out, their suits flaring behind them. Victor's face twisted with betrayal. "You're throwing away everything we built." Ryan's jaw tightened. "No, I'm saving what I destroyed." That night, he found Amanda in Central Park, sitting on a bench while the boys chased each other around the carousel, their laughter oddly defiant against the chaos closing in. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "Well," she asked, "have you chosen?" Ryan sank onto the bench beside her, his hands trembling. "I told them the truth. That you and the boys are mine." that I would not walk away. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion sharp as a blade. At your empire, what did your precious board say? They threatened me. Deals will collapse. Investors may walk. I may lose it all. He turned to her then, his eyes burning. But I would rather lose every dollar than lose another day. With them, for the first time in years, Amanda faltered, her breath caught, her defenses slipping for a heartbeat before she rebuilt them. Words. Ryan, you've always been good with words. But can you live it? Can you stand when the empire crumbles and there's nothing left but the three boys you ignored for 5 years? As if summoned, Dylan ran over, his face flushed from running. Mom, look, he said, holding up a prize he'd won from the carousel booth. His eyes flicked to Ryan, suspicious as always, but this time he didn't step between them. He handed the small plastic horse to Amanda, who smiled faintly, then returned to playing with his brothers. Ryan watched them, his throat tight. I don't care if they never forgive me. I don't care if they never call me Dad. I just want to be here. I want to try. Amanda stared at him for a long time, her face unreadable. Then she whispered, then prove it, Ryan. Not with money, not with promises, with presence, with patience, with everything you once thought was weakness. The words lodged in him like a vow. He knew the fight was far from over. He would lose allies, lose wealth, lose reputation. But in that moment, watching three little boys laugh beneath the carousel lights, Ryan understood the stakes had shifted forever. The empire he once bled for was slipping from his grasp. But for the first time in his life, he no longer feared the loss. For the first time, Ryan Harrison feared only one thing: losing them again. The weeks that followed were a blur of chaos, headlines, and tension sharp enough to cut glass. Harrison Global trembled under the weight of scandal. Deals crumbled, investors abandoned ship, and the media painted Ryan as a man living a double life. For the first time in his career, Ryan was not in control. He had chosen Amanda and the boys. He had stood up in front of his board and said he would not deny them, and now he was paying the price. But even as billions slipped from his grasp, he found himself strangely lighter. Every evening he sought them out. He showed up at the carousel with hot cocoa when the wind turned bitter. He walked Dylan through his homework, clumsy but determined. He listened to Mason chatter about superheroes he invented, heroes who lived in worlds where fathers never abandoned their children. And Ethan watched him with those piercing green eyes. His questions quiet but cutting. Why now? He asked one night as Ryan tucked a blanket around him. Why didn't you come before? The question burned more than any headline. Ryan swallowed his shame and whispered, because I was a fool. Because I thought building towers made me strong, when really it made me weak, and small. Brow furrowed, but for the first time, he leaned his head against Ryan's chest. That single gesture was worth more than every fortune he'd ever counted. But Amanda remained a fortress. She allowed Ryan into their days, but never lowered her guard. Each time he tried to speak of the future, she deflected. Each time he hinted at forgiveness, her eyes hardened, until one night, when she asked him to walk with her alone, away from the boys. The park was nearly empty, a cold wind shaking the last leaves from the trees. Amanda's coat was too thin, but she didn't shiver. She walked in silence for a long time before finally speaking, her voice low and steady. There's something you don't know, she said, something I never told you. Ryan's chest tightened. What is it? She stopped beneath a lamppost, the light casting a pale circle around her. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, he saw not anger, but sorrow so deep it hollowed her face. When the boys were born, they were sick. All three of them, weak lungs, fragile hearts. The doctor said it would take constant care, medicine we couldn't afford. I was desperate. I went to one of your company's charities. Do you know what they told me? Her voice broke, but she forced the words out. They said no exceptions. They said I didn't qualify. While I held 3 infants struggling to breathe, the empire you built turned us away. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ryan's feet. He staggered back, shaking his head. No, Amanda, no. I didn't know. You didn't care to know. She snapped, the fire surging back. You were too busy counting billions to notice your own policies. We're choking the life out of your children. Ryan's breath came ragged, his hands trembling as he raked them through his hair. The image seared into his mind. Amanda cradling 3 tiny boys pleading for help, while some cold employee of his empire turned her away in his name. His knees nearly buckled. He wanted to scream. to tear down every building he had built brick by brick. How did they survive? His voice was barely a whisper. Amanda's eyes glistened, and her chin quivered despite her strength. By luck, by neighbors who gave when they had nothing. By nights, I went without food so they could have medicine. By strangers who cared more than you ever did. Ryan's throat closed. He thought of every gala, every charity ball, where he had stood beneath chandeliers bragging about impact, while his own children had been gasping for air in the dark. His empire wasn't just empty, it had been lethal. Amanda turned from him, her shoulders stiff. That's why I don't trust you. That's why I don't believe in your speeches about change. Because when it mattered most, when their lives hung by a thread, you weren't there. Your empire was. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ryan wanted to fall to his knees, to beg forgiveness, but he knew forgiveness wasn't his to demand. He forced himself to stand tall, though his voice trembled. Then let me tear it down, he said. Let me fix what I built wrong. Not with money, not with words, but with action. If it means dismantling Harrison Global, if it means rebuilding it from the ground up, I'll do it. For them, for you, for the chance to make it right. Amanda turned, her eyes wide, her lips parting slightly at the conviction in his voice. For the first time, she saw not the arrogant billionaire who had cast her aside, but a man broken by his own sins, willing to burn everything he had to save what remained. You can't erase the past, she whispered. No, Ryan admitted, his voice raw, but I can change the future. I can make sure no other mother is turned away. I can make sure my sons know their father is more than a name in a headline. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering brittle leaves at their feet. For a long moment, Amanda said nothing. Then, at last, she nodded once, barely more than a breath, a movement. Then prove it, not to me. To them, behind them, the boys' laughter rang out as they played, oblivious to the storm between their parents. Ryan turned to watch them, his vision blurred by tears. His empire was crumbling, his reputation lay in ruins. But for the first time in his life, he felt hope, because what lay ahead was not a boardroom or a skyscraper, but 3 little boys who still called him a stranger, and who one day might call him something far greater. And as Amanda stood beside him, her hand brushing his for the first time in 6 years, Ryan knew the battle had only begun. But this time, it was a battle worth losing everything for.